Okay, so good morning, everybody. Welcome back to week number 4 of Global Challenges for Business and Society. We've been talking a lot about responsible management, responsible leadership. What are the different challenges that organizations and the society are facing these days? And we're trying to understand what kind of responses can there be. So last week, we talked about broadly about the triple bottom line. We talked about the 3 Ps, and I started to give you some hints about the quiz questions that might be coming in your first quiz at least. One of the other students asked me that they can't find the quiz questions on GC Learn. They're not there yet. They'll be available on the 8th of November. I've already mentioned that in a couple of times in the assignment brief as well. But the first set of questions will be available from the 8th of November. And that is because those are based on the carbon literacy training. And carbon literacy training, all the seminars will finish on the 8th of November. And that's when we'll start looking at the quiz questions. So the first set of 10 questions will be available on the 8th of November. And you have until the 16th of December to actually fill those. So you've got plenty of time. The only condition is that you must be doing that at one go. You can't say that I'm starting it now, I'm answering 5 questions, I'm going to go out, come back, and then do that. So you can do that at any time between 8th of November and 16th of December. However, you must do that in one sitting. You'll have 35 to 40 minutes to do 10 questions. It shouldn't take you more than 10 minutes anyway, probably 5 minutes, because the questions are all questions that we will be discussing in the class already. And I told you about 3 questions. If you want to find out what those 3 questions are, just go back to the recordings from last week and you will find out what those are. And I think I mentioned that about 3 or 4 times. And I might just mention that again, probably today. So week number 4, lectures. What's wrong with this? Right, okay, so just a quick recap of what we did last week. So last week, we started to understand the role of business in society. In this broader understanding and discussion about sustainability that we've been having over the last 3 weeks, it was really important for us to understand what the role of the business in society is. Because the understanding of that role over the last decades, few decades, 50, 60, 70 years has been very different. What organizations have always focused on is that organizations are there to make profit and profit only, and they must have no other role. Nobody really thought about the impact that organizations are creating because of their presence and their operations and the resources that they take from the environment and the society, but there's no return for that. So one understanding of the role of business in society is of profit maximization at all costs. That is optimal returns for shareholders. And we also then had a discussion about how do we define shareholders? And shareholders are people, as minority group of people who own the organization either fully or partially. It could even be 0.5% to 0.001%. You might actually have a share of a large organization, and that'll make you a shareholder. But even if you look at all the shareholders collectively, you will find that they're a very small percentage of people. Okay. And there could be other organizations who might have shares in other organizations as well. The other role that people might say that, no, that's not the role of an organization. We should not really be focusing on profit maximization. Organizations must be responsible only for society and for the environment. That's the other side of the argument. What we then discussed in our last week's lecture, why can't it be a bit of both? I think my range is not here. Yeah, okay. So what we want is, when we define complete leadership, we want both together. We don't want companies to simply just be profit maximizers, and we don't only want them to be responsible towards society and environment. Organizations can do a bit of both so that it's a win-win situation for the organization and for the society as a whole. So a complete leadership then would be an approach that combines optimum returns for shareholders with responsibility for the environment and the society. If organizations can do both, and they must do both, then we can talk about those organizations as complete organizations and those leaders and managers as complete leaders, because then they're not only looking after one small minority of people, they're actually looking after those people who are shareholders, but they're also looking after other people who are within the society and the environment as well. Okay, so the role of business in society then is threefold. Number one, to innovate, to deliver products and services. to use resources efficiently so that value is created, and number three, to conduct operations so that they are performed profitably and accepted by society. That acceptance by society is a very important thing. If the society does not accept that product or a service, then quite likely you and I will not buy from them. And I took an example of Body Shop last week. Okay, Body Shop, a cosmetics company, a leading cosmetics company, very clearly differentiated themselves by saying that we will not test on animals. So they were against animal cruelty, and they differentiated themselves from other organizations by saying that this is an ethical company. We want to be on the ethical side. We will actually have herbal products that don't need to be tested on animals, and we will not do that. So Body Shop was accepted by society because of those reasons. And that was very important. That's not just the one example. Have you heard of this company called Patagonia? Patagonia is one of the most eco-friendly, ethical organizations. It was actually started by people who were enthusiasts of mountain climbing. And when they were climbing mountains, they used to put these little, I don't know what they're called, pythons or something. They're like little kind of screws that actually hammer into the rocks. Then they put their ropes through them and then they actually climb. What they found was there were so many hundreds of people doing that that actually started to damage the environment. And they wanted to find out, can we build a product that actually then doesn't damage the environment, but also allows people to access the outdoors at the same time, rock climbing and those kind of things. So the company started with those things, started to build products that were eco-friendly, that were less damaging to the environment. And then slowly the company started to build from there. And that became one of the largest multi-billion organization in the world. What they did was remarkable at the end. They actually sold that company, not actually sold the company, they donated that company to a charity. The entire multi-billion organization is now run by a charity. It's not owned by any single individual or a small group of people. It's actually now owned by people like us because through that charity, through that foundation. So there are examples that success can be gained by ethical and responsible means. It doesn't have to be profit at all cost. It doesn't have to be at the cost of the environment and the society. And that's a key message that I want to give because a lot of people think that no, organizations can only be successful if they actually only look after themselves and nobody else. Organizations can only be successful if they actually exploit resources from the environment and the society. But that is not true. There are hundreds of examples like that, and I'll try and keep giving you. I'm only giving you examples of companies in that reading list, Volkswagen and Airbus and Rolls-Royce and BP, who've actually been on the wrong side of ethical practices. But I've also given you two examples, Body Shop and Patagonia, who've been on the right side of ethical practices and equally, perhaps more successful, more widely accepted by the society and have a better uh, goodwill in the society compared to an organization like BP or Airbus or somebody. So it's really important to think as managers that you don't have to exploit the environment, the society to be successful. You can be on the right side of ethical practices and still be able to do that. But the big question then, we know what is the role of society now. Okay, so this was until last week. So now we know what the role of society is, and that is to combine profitability with environmental and social responsibility. That's fine. We know that now. Okay, so we know what the role of business in society is, but we also need to understand how are they able to perform that role? What is it that they need to do to be able to perform that role? Okay, so that's what the topic of our discussion for the first part of our lectures would be. And we looked at this slide as well last week, and the answer is to that question is through responsible management and leadership. Organizations can make profits, they can have high financial performance, but they can also be responsible towards society and towards the environment. Okay, so the answer is that. How is the question? And the answer is through responsible management and leadership. What does that mean? And that means these three things: being a responsible corporate organization, incorporating sustainable management practices, and following ethical management practices and policies. It's as simple as that, being on the right side of not just legislation, but also ethics. It's really important to do that. But then when somebody wants to make a difference, They need to really understand what's going on out there. What are the trends that are out there that we need to support? So number one, there's a huge growth in population. Okay, we know that at the moment we're sitting at about 8.1 billion people uh, in different countries, of course, and so the global population is going to rise to 9.1 or 9.2 billion, perhaps even more than that, 9.5 maybe, by the end of 2050. Okay, that's one trend. The other trend is that there's a massive urbanization that's been happening for a long time. So people from rural and small areas or small towns and cities are actually moving to larger cities. And that is creating what we call as mega cities. If you remember from if you've already done the seminar this week, and those who are actually going to be doing the seminar later on, you will notice that one of the slides in the scenarios game was what? Mega cities booming. Do you recall? How do you define a megacity? A megacity is a city that actually has a minimum of 10 million population or more. So the rise in megacities around the world is quite drastic. What that means is more people are moving away from smaller cities and rural areas into urban areas. If you move into urban areas, your resource requirement increases automatically, which means that we're actually emitting more if you actually move on. Number one, the population is more because we need more resources for consumption. And number two, moving to cities requires more emissions in terms of transportation, in terms of energy use, et cetera, et cetera. There has also been, in the last 20 to 30 years, a shift in the balance of power, mostly from the West to the East. The rise of China and India as economic superpowers has been quite visible. So that's changing as well. And so therefore, globalization means that, the whole world is a market and a producer. You can look at yourselves around you. Things that we buy and use are not necessarily produced where we live. They're produced from a different place. Most likely your clothes are produced in China or Bangladesh or India or Pakistan or Morocco or Turkey. Your computers are produced mostly in Taiwan or China. So if you look around you, you will see that the balance of economic power has shifted quite significantly over the last 20, 30 years. And then, of course, there is climate change. No organizations can ignore the impacts of climate change at the moment. Because of the rising population, they're all connected to each other. There is more pressure on resources. Water is scarce, food is scarce, and energy is scarce as well. People don't have enough to fulfill their needs. Because of these, there is a threat to biodiversity. Demographic shifts, aging population. What does that mean? If you got aging population, what's happening at the moment, if you divide the entire population into three parts, one is people up to the age of 16. Second is people from 17 to 64 or 65, which is the working population. And then you got people from 65 onwards. So the retirees or the old age pensioners, right? Now, the old age pensioners, they need to be looked after. The children need to be looked after in terms of their education, their health, and everything else. So the working age population is from 16 to 64 or 17 to 64, and that's been shrinking because of kind of the improvements in healthcare. What's happening is that people are living longer, which is great. Okay, what that means also that they need to be supported financially for longer time as well. That is all putting some more pressure on the working age population. How would the government respond to that? By increasing taxes, perhaps. So there's a lot of pressure happening on population. So it's not a simple word saying that there's a demographic shift and there's an aging population. There is a financial impact of that. So if any of you are doing your degrees in investment and finance and risk, you will find that the pensions industry is changing significantly now as well, because there has to be a change. If you need to support people, the birth rate is slowing down. In Scotland, that's different though. I mean, the last report said that the birth rate has increased. But overall in Europe, the birth rate has been slowing down quite significantly. If the birth rate is slowing down, there'll be less people between the 0 to 16 age. There'll be more people in the 65 plus age. And so therefore the pressure on the population in the middle will be quite significant as well. Okay, the governments have to, and organizations have to start catering to it. So what kind of industries perhaps then might boom? The pensions industry, the care home industry. These kind of industries are actually booming right now. They're actually growing year on year. Why is that? Because of that demographic shifts and changes. So organizations have to start looking at and respond to it. There is changes in diet. There is increased demand for food, and so therefore there are problems with food security. Now that it's not that as a globe, as a world, we don't produce enough. We actually produce more than what we need, but that's not distributed equally. And so therefore there are some parts in the world where people may not have food to eat, and there are other parts of the world where we might be wasting 40% of our food. So that unequal distribution of food is causing food scarcity as well in some places, and therefore food security. But if you look at it from a positive point of view, people are actually a lot of you might have seen in your supermarkets in the last 3 or 4 years the changes to the vegan section, the plant-based diet. That's increased significantly. There are full aisles now, which actually are simply just stocking plant-based food. Why is that? Because the demand in the market has changed. We have actually, as consumers, changed, and we want to demand from organizations, supermarkets, and restaurants. You'll probably find vegan restaurants as well. There's a huge, big market of the no-low beverages. You know about the no-low, so no alcohol or low alcohol. The amount of increase, the percentage increase in people consuming no or zero alcohol drinks is increased quite significantly. So organizations have to respond to that as well. These are all social and environmental benefits there with these kind of things. And finally, we've all gone through recently, and perhaps all of us were affected by one of the largest pandemics that ever affected the earth, which was COVID-19. So it's important that organizations start to look at what the global trends are, because without understanding these, they won't be able to respond and become more socially responsible corporates. So this is a context that needs to be established before they move on to understanding what is CSR. Have you all heard of this term before? CSR? Corporate social responsibility. One thing I want to really clarify to you, that this S doesn't only stand for society. That social is a broader term that stands for society and environmental both. So you can't really say that CSR, an organization following CSR principles, is only looking after the society. No, they also have to be responsible towards the environment. So it encompasses both society and environment. But as a broad general term, it is referred to as CSR, so corporate social responsibility. The name will suggest to you a lot of things which are quite common. So the big question then is, are businesses acting in the best interest of our society? And when I say society again, I'm talking about society and environment. Over the last so many decades, we've seen one form of market structure, which is capitalism, that the market decides everything, taking things away from the public sector, taking things away from the state, and the whole market is derived from capitalism, which is not perhaps a bad thing. But extreme capitalism, the one that focuses only on profitability or profit maximization, and perhaps only focuses on a small group of people, that is the shareholders, might have led to some of the issues and crises that we had over the past few years. So then there is a concept of extreme capitalism versus conscious capitalism, okay, the softer form of capitalism that's being more responsible. Extreme capitalism has led to the financial crisis and ethical meltdowns of recent years. Go back all the way to 1930s, 100 years ago, the US financial crisis, and then of course there have been a number of them over the past few years. And that could be quite devastating for economies and individuals and people and organizations. And there has been calls for a deep reflection of, is what we're doing correct? Is the approach towards society and social structure and economic structure okay? Or do we need to think about any alternatives? So the damage that's probably been done because of extreme capitalism is being reflected upon. And there is a new kind of concept of conscious capitalism that's emerging as well. Conscious capitalism offers that alternative to extreme capitalism, and that leads to the acknowledgement that responsible and ethical business is essential for the future of our world. More and more organizations are now recognizing that they need to be more conscious of their responsibility towards society and towards the environment. Particularly in the time of climate change, globalization, frequent humanitarian crises, and a global pandemic, businesses with its resources, knowledge, and power can offer much more than just doing less harm. I want to take a pause here and I want to really reflect upon this important aspect. What is it that the governments can contribute to the challenges? Remember, we've been talking about global challenges over the past few weeks. What can businesses do to contribute to these problems or to help to solve these problems? Now, businesses have, of course, we've always understood them as people or organizations that are there to make profits, but there have been some benefits as well. Businesses have knowledge, they got power, and they can make a change. The United Nations recognized this very well, and they created something called as the United Nations Global Compact, UNGC. It's a useful concept for you to know. You can actually use that in your coursework one, the group report as well, the first question. Right. So it's important that the United Nations recognized the power of corporates. What they said was that, and we'll discuss this in next week when I'm going to be discussing about more about the Sustainable Development Goals more in detail. But the Sustainable Development Goals were introduced in 2015, right? But before that, you had the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs, and there were 8 Millennium Development Goals because the United Nations had recognized that this millennia, we must be free from a lot of different ailments that kind of impacts or harms the society. Poverty, hunger, lack of education, gender imbalance or inequality, and many other ones. So what's important really to understand that the United Nations recognized this much earlier, and they came up with the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. And then in 2015, and that was for a period of 15 years to understand that can we reach those goals by the end of 2015. We did some, we couldn't others, and then they came up with a new solution to say that we'll actually create more goals, 17 of them this time, and they were clubbed as Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. The key difference between MDGs and SDGs was that MDGs were a responsibility of the governments of the developing countries, which is where they found the problems. So more poverty in some parts of Asia, of Africa, and they said that they need to involve the governments over there. They will allocate funds to them and they'll do something about it. However, when it came to 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals, they realized that these are global goals. Climate change is not just a problem with Asia or Africa, it's a problem around the world. The whole world is being affected by that. Okay, when pandemics hit, they don't really just hit one country or two countries, it actually impacted the entire world. And so therefore there were two big changes. One was that they actually expanded the goals. Number two, it was for the entire globe, for all countries to participate and contribute, not just for some specific countries. And to be able to effectively deal with that, they realized that the governments can't just do it all by themselves. The United Nations can't just do it all by themselves. They must involve corporates. And so therefore they created what is called as the United Nations Global Compact, UNGC, which is a large organization, a membership organization of large corporates around the world, and they then contribute to sustainability, etc., and that sort of thing, and to solve the problems. So businesses with its resources, knowledge, and power can offer much more than simply just doing less harm. So what we've been recognized as corporates as so far to say that they've been harming the environment so much, and they should simply just change their activities so that they can cause less harm. But that's not just enough. We need organizations to do good as well at the same time. So it's not just about the end product for organizations. There are growing signals from the market that companies are expected to be more responsible throughout their entire value chain. So it's not just about the end product. It's also important for organizations to say that we provide good working conditions. We will source our cotton, for example, for textiles in a more responsible manner. We'll pay the farmers who are actually growing the cotton seed an equal pay. We'll use fair trade policies, for example. We'll use responsible wood or paper for our products. So the entire value chain needs to be more responsible than just simply saying that the final product is good enough. So CSR, corporate social responsibility, can be an effective pathway to meeting these expectations from the organizations. So with a holistic approach to CSR, businesses can become a force for good and the solution to the world's most pressing problems. So if all businesses start to look at the SDGs, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, they'll be able to contribute much more powerfully than what the governments could ever do. Okay, and so therefore, corporates are being urged now to take much bigger responsibility towards solving some of the global problems uh, that that are there out there in the society. We've seen in the past that the businesses have kind of contributed to the harm in the society in terms of exploitation, but they've actually also given us a lot of good. The big business sector has delivered essential goods to society and economy. They've manufactured products that are important to people's quality of lives. If you think about specific industries like the healthcare industry, for example, there's been so many innovations that actually are now causing positive changes. There is perhaps people can be detected of cancer earlier, they can be cured. Many illnesses can be cured. You think about the pandemic, they were able to bring out a mass rollout of billions and billions of vaccines within a span of 12 months of the pandemic hitting. Normally, it takes about 25 to 30 years for a drug to actually come out in the market. But the universities and organizations combined together, and they were able to bring it out within about 12 months' time, which saved thousands and perhaps millions of lives around the world. They provide people with the dignity of a job in Korea. That's another good thing that organizations do. A majority of the people around the world, some of the people do run their own organizations, but a majority of the people are actually employed by somebody, and that employment is a positive thing. It actually gives them a good salary. It gives them dignity of life, quality of life. It gives them a job and respect, and that's really important. Organizations pay their taxes. We would like them to pay more taxes, but they do pay their taxes, and they contribute to economic growth. So organizations pay their taxes, they pay the national insurance contributions, they pay their pensions contributions, and all those are basically contributing to a good society, to an equal and a just society. And that's really an important thing to understand. So there are some good things. We should always not blame the organizations for doing all the bad things in the society. It's really important that we understand the contributions, the positive contributions of organizations throughout. But yes, we also know that there has been a lot of destruction and exploitation undertaken by organizations. So on the other hand, businesses are also responsible for the vast destruction of the environment and the climate change, single-handedly, pretty much. They've been responsible over the centuries for slavery, for illnesses and human suffering, and animal cruelty. So how can we actually then ask them to be more responsible? Somewhere between the two, the good versus harm, somewhere between the two, these two extremes, emerges the important role of CSR. As our world, economy, and society rapidly change, CSR can offer a way for businesses to be more responsible and more ethical. So if organizations start to practice corporate social responsibility, we can see that some of these harms that's been done on society can perhaps change and reverse. Sorry, where's that? Yeah, that one there. So these harms that we're talking about, they could be reversed if organizations can start thinking about CSR in a more positive manner. What we have seen also in the past that companies that adopt a broader view of their responsibilities and a holistic approach to sustainability, companies that genuinely contribute to the world and ensure responsibility and sustainability in everything that they do, they see many benefits for all stakeholders. And in last week's lecture, we paused and we thought about the differences between shareholders and stakeholders. Do you all remember that? So the stakeholders are a larger group of people or organizations who are broadly, somebody mentioned that they are interested in the organization. Okay. In other words, you can also define stakeholders as those group of people or individuals or organizations who can be influenced by the organization and those who can influence the organization. So both ways. So people who can be influenced by the organization and can influence the organization are called stakeholders. So it's really important that if companies start to broaden their focus from simply a narrow focus of shareholders, which is a small group of people, to a broader group of people, which is the stakeholders, they'll actually be able to do much more good than harm. What kind of benefits are we talking about for those stakeholders? So what are those benefits for stakeholders? Now think about stakeholders. We took an example of Heathrow's Terminal 3 last week. where we talked about who can be the stakeholders. We identified that there might be environmentalists, there might be people who are living around the airports who are affected, the airlines who use the airport, the passengers who use the airport, the people who work at the airport, the organizations who've got set up organizations or businesses or shops within the airport premises, etc., etc. So all of those are different stakeholders. The employees who work at the airport as well. So it's important that organizations start to broaden their understanding of who they need to benefit. And if they include all stakeholders, then everybody is happy. It's really important that they not only think about a small group of people for profit making or return for investments, but also think about all the people who invest resources in the organization. So employees are more highly engaged when working for a company with a strong purpose. We talked about purpose last week. Consumers often prefer to buy from companies that have a good reputation in the community and are willing to pay a higher premium for sustainable products. And we've seen that in the past, that as consumers, we're willing to pay a little bit more for that company which actually acts more responsibly. The community in which the organization is based benefits from strong and ongoing partnerships with the corporations that operate within them. And I took the example of Tunnocks and Uddingston last week, a good symbiotic relationship between the company and the community, a very strong partnership between them, and they both benefit. Governments and international organizations gain a genuine partner to help them address society's biggest challenges far beyond the boon of those firms paying simply just their taxes. So the organizations are expected to do a little bit more. And I gave you the example of United Nations Global Compact as one of the examples of that. The environment is then looked after, and our only planet is better taken care of. Consequently, shareholders benefit too when all the other stakeholders are satisfied and should receive a better return on investment from a company that is sustainable and as such can yield a profit for longer. So the other definition of sustainability is long-term returns, not simply just short-term returns. So if you look after all of these stakeholders, the shareholders are automatically benefiting because their money is actually much more valued over a longer period of time compared to perhaps maybe looking for a return within a year or 2 years or 5 years. Their investment has got much more value. So it's a win-win for us, for everybody. So anybody who's suggesting that shareholders will actually lose their value because they have to invest in stakeholders or in the society or in the environment, that is simply incorrect. The financial performance of organizations has increased as a result of investing in sustainability practices. And so therefore, there is a clear connection between investment in sustainability, looking after all the stakeholders, and the benefit to the shareholders. It's really important that we start thinking about those things. Okay, there's a clear connection between all of them. And so therefore, I'll end this part of our lecture by talking very briefly about holistic CSR. So we started to talk about extreme capitalism. Then we found an alternative, which was conscious capitalism. We then tried to understand between last week and this week what the role of the society is in all that. And then we moved on from there to CSR, corporate social responsibility. How can organizations combine profitable returns for shareholders with responsibility towards society and environment? And we realized that both can be done equally well. I've given you examples of Patagonia, I've given you examples of Body Shop, and there are many other examples. For example, Green and Blacks. Have you heard of that company? It's an organic chocolate company. Have you heard of Innocent Smoothies? Anyone? Innocent Smoothies? It's a very popular smoothie drink, and they are an ethical organization and a very profitable organization as well at the same time. There is some criticism of that, and I'll discuss with you some other time. They were bought by Coke, actually, so for $100 million not long ago. So the whole claim about being ethical was kind of slightly blurred when Coke approached them to buy over that company. But these companies are all started on the basis of ethical principles, benefits to health, against animal cruelty, being more ethical for all its stakeholders, including the environment and the society. And so therefore, if we have to encapsulate CSR into one term, I would then use holistic CSR as that. Holistic CSR can contribute to positive outcomes for the company, profitability, growth, bigger market share, good reputation, as well as for all its other stakeholders, employees, consumers, governments, and shareholders themselves as well, right? So what we've learned today, oops, hold on, it's not finished yet. So what we've learned today is we've recapped from last week the role of business in society. What is it and how can it be fulfilled? We talked about conscious capitalism. We talked about corporate social responsibility. Must be an A there. Benefits with an E to stakeholders and holistic CSR. Apologies for the spelling errors there. So we've talked about all of these things. So what we've talked about last week was what is the role of business in society. Today, our topic of discussion was how can they perform that role within the society so that they can benefit themselves and they can benefit the society and they can benefit the environment as well, right? So I'm leaving you for a break with this in mind. Our globe is like that and it's melting. So, it's important that we do not let it ruin, act before it's too late. And any questions, any comments, anything you want to ask me? So let's take a short break. I think it's going to be a shorter lecture today. We will come back in about 5-7 minutes if you want. And then we'll continue with our carbon literacy training part, which is again a shorter part today. But thank you very much, and I'll see you in a moment.